guess, shall we ask everyone to mute who isn't already muted? And we will officially begin. Welcome to the party. We are super excited. This book has two covers. I just want to say, Rodleigh's in Australia. This is what it looks like in Australia and South Africa and Japan and New Zealand and India and UK. And it shimmers and shines with gold lettering. And in North America and Canada and US and Europe, it looks like this. So here we are launching this book into flight. And I'm really, really excited. I think everybody here must know who Henri is, that he was a professor at Yale and Harvard, that he went to live in L'Arche Daybreak with people with intellectual disabilities for the last 10 years of his life. He lived with people with and without intellectual disabilities. We share our lives together. I knew him there for 6 or 7 years. And when he died, he left pieces of a book about his friendship with the Flying Rodleighs, a fabulous trapeze troupe in a traveling circus. Now, it's kind of boring to launch a book with a co-author who died 25 years ago. So it's extremely exciting to me that Rodleigh is alive and that we get to launch this book together. So
yes, thank you, Carolyn. That's I am alive and well, and I have survived a lot of changes in my life since Henri knew us. But most of which, though, these memories coming back and helping to launch this book that Henri so badly wanted to write about us is really a lovely reminder of our friendship with him and how it is that this comes to be. And I'm so pleased that we were able to finally do that. I know that at one stage, the documentary film that we did, Angels Over the Net, thanks to Bart Gavigan, was released and shown to people all around the world. And now we get to have a book which is in print, which is even better because once the film has been shown and people forget about it, but the book is there. And I'm going to show you my version of the book, and it's really fun that Flying, Falling and Catching has now got wings.
So what should we do next? I guess I could tell you a little about the book. Shall I do that? It's
Caroline, why don't you tell us how you got to write this book and why that big job got put onto your shoulders?
Yeah, the pieces that Henri had written were really not that much. There were 2 chapters he tried to write of a book. He wanted to write a book that would be different. He wanted it to read like fiction. He wanted it to be a story. He didn't want to write lessons. He wanted to write stories that people could draw their own conclusions and come to their own ideas. And he wanted to give them the material of a story, but not pre-chew it for them, I think. So I was asked 5 years ago to take this on, and I read everything that Henri had left, and I was intrigued, but I didn't quite know how to get into the story. And what really changed it for me actually was reading Rodleigh's your own memoir of Henri called "What a Friend We Had in Henri." In fact, you started out with a story about going to Henri's funeral, his first funeral. In case people don't know, being Henri Nouwen, he had 2 funerals, 2 burials, and 3 caskets. You can find out about that in the book. Henri didn't do anything by halves. But I'm going to read you. Can I just actually read you the very prologue, the beginning, because that gets you into the story and into Rodleigh's relationship with Henri a bit. This is September 16th, or September 1996. When they received the phone call telling them of Henri's death, the 5 members of the Flying Rodleighs trapeze troupe were stunned. Before removing their flashy silver capes during their next performance, Rodleigh Stevens took a deep breath and offered a short speech dedicating the performance to the memory of their friend Henri Nouwen. On the day of Henri's funeral, Rodleigh, with his wife and colleague Jenny Stevens, drove 170 miles to St. Catherine's Cathedral in Utrecht. They looked up into the stone Gothic arches and around the enormous space, amazed that it was so full. We should have expected this, Rodleigh whispered to Jenny. They knew that Henry was famous, with millions of books in print, translated into dozens of languages. They knew that Henry was a Roman Catholic priest from the Netherlands who had been a professor at Yale and Harvard, then over the past decade had given up his academic career to live with people with intellectual disabilities in Canada. They'd known Henry well for more than 5 years, but they were shocked when one speaker described Henry as anguished and wounded. Rodleigh shifted uneasily and clutched the edge of the hard wooden pew to hold himself back from rushing to the front of the church to offer a corrective. His mind was full of images and memories of the very different Henry that he knew through visits, letters, and traveling together in Germany and the Netherlands with the circus barroom. Perhaps many of Henry's friends, aware of his yearning and inner pain, and many who for years read his personally revealing books on the spiritual life, would have been equally surprised to discover that Henry believed his most important book was going to be a work of creative nonfiction about his experience with the Flying Rodleighs, a book that his sudden death in September 1996 left unfinished.
Wow, what a great prologue. And I think that it's definitely keeps everything in a nutshell, because our friendship with Henry was very unlike any friendships that we've had before. And from what I understand, very unlike any friendship that Henry had before. And I know that he desperately wanted to share that friendship with many people. And I'm so pleased that all of those notes and those interviews that he took with us that were transcripted and have finally found a home. They finally found a home between the covers of Flying, Falling, and Catching. And I think that Henry would be in approval of what you've created, Carolyn. So thank you so much for extending Henry's life and extending Henry's memory to all of us again.
So I really would love to hear, Rodleigh, to talk about, meeting Henry, your first experience of him. But I also know we also have some video of Henry's the first time he saw you. And I don't know which way we should go first. Which way? Do you want to talk about Henry?
Yeah, no, I'll answer the question first and then we'll show the video. So basically what happened is Henry had come to see the circus in Freiburg, bringing his father along. And he was in Freiburg in Germany, translating one of his books into German. And the hosts that he was living with said, oh, there's a circus in town. Why don't you come and see the show with us? And they said, oh, that'll be nice. So he brought his 90-year-old father with him, sat and watched the show. And it was a regular circus show with animals and clowns, etc. And then we came on, and Henry was so amazed about our act, which we didn't think was anything particularly special as far as the circus world is concerned. We just continued going, but it made a big sort of effect on him, so that he wanted to see us again, or at least meet us. And the next day he came and watched the show again. And actually before the show, he went to the director, the owner of the circus, Mr. Gad Simonite, and said, how can I meet the Flying Rodleighs? And it just so happened that my sister Carleen was buying her daughter an ice cream at that time. So he pointed to her and said, there's one of them right there. Why don't you go over and say hello to her? So he went over to Carleen, and Carleen was kind of astounded that a member of the public came to her, because that isn't common. And he said, can I get to meet you guys? So she said, yes, well, we're about to start the show now. So during the intermission, which is straight after our Flying Trapeze Act, why don't you come around the back and I'll bring you in and we'll meet the rest of the team. So we didn't know that this had happened. So after the act, which went off very well, and we went backstage. Well, we got all of our things together, put the net down, and got ready for the next act. And during the intermission, most people come and walk around in the circus zoo. And suddenly this tall guy was standing in our group of flying trapeze. So there's 5 of us in the flying act. And usually Carleen's daughter, who's also Kylene, but for purpose of confusion, we're just calling her Kai. And anyway, she was standing there, and next to her was this tall, gangly guy with very thick glasses, smiling. He's so hard at us. And we said, oh, and she introduced him and said, hi, this is Henry. So I said, oh, hello, good afternoon or good evening. And we spoke for just a little bit and said, look, we have to talk about the act because we're doing a debrief of what happened during the show, so that if anything happens the next time, we kind of prepared for it, or just to make sure that it's not a problem with the gear or whatever the case is. And during the conversation, I led the conversation, and I say, okay, what happened here? What happened there? Did everything feel good there and that? And while we were talking, Henry got closer and closer to the talker, whoever was speaking, and he started to lean right in front of them. So it was kind of right in your face like that, saying, and this big smile on his face. And finally I said to him, Henry, why are you looking at us like that? Why are you standing right in front of us? And he said, because I don't always hear what you say, so I have to see you say it. And so that already alerted us to the fact that not only was this an elderly, balding, smiling guy, but he couldn't hear very well. So we better talk clearly and we better talk slowly. Nonetheless, it was just an introduction to Henry that we remembered from the beginning. And we often talked about how funny he was, because by the end of that session, talking to everybody and his comical changing of facial expressions as we were talking, and as he considered things and wanted to know more and more, it was really just a matter of we all started laughing and saying, sorry, we're not laughing at you in a rude way. We're just laughing at how unbelievably funny this is, because we've never had anybody show an interest in our act, let alone respond the way you're responding to us. So at the end of our discussion, when everybody would part ways and go to their own accommodation, Henry stuck around with me, and we walked for a little way together. And I said, look, the second part of the show is going to start again. Why don't you go along and enjoy the rest of the show? He said, oh, I've already seen the show. It's not that important to me. I want to spend time with you. So I said, well, in that case, we're doing a rehearsal tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock. So if you'd like to join us tomorrow morning and attend one of our rehearsals and get to know us a bit better, we can spend a bit more time chatting to you and telling you more about flying trapeze. And that was the beautiful beginning of this relationship that we've had for so long, and what started Henry on a journey of becoming another member in our flying trapeze team. And so, once we got to the point where Henry had come to be, for the rest of that week, by the way, while we were in Freiburg, we saw Henry every day. He came to the shows, came to our rehearsals, attended all of our discussions afterwards, and just immersed himself into our flying trapeze. It was almost like we had no choice but to be a friend with him, because he so badly wanted to be our friend. And so, and that was easy for us, because he was not at all abrasive. He was not anything that we thought could hurt us. In fact, he was an enjoyment around us, because quite often we were laughing in his company. There was always something to laugh about, not necessarily at his expense, but generally he'll ask us the same questions over and over again, expecting the answer to be different, but sometimes the answer wasn't different. And he just was a sponge for information. He wanted to know as much about us as possible. And I often said to him, I said, Henry, why do you need to know that? Why would you want to know that? He said, I need to know everything about you. I need to know everything about the trapeze and how it works, and it's important to me. And I said, okay, I'll give you the time. And quite often in the years later on, it would get a bit much, where he'd be asking us all these questions, drilling me, and almost like an inquisition, and to the point where I'd say, I've already answered that a few different ways. Why are you asking it again? And yes, there were a few times that I became irritable with him because he kept asking the questions, but it never stopped him. He just wanted to know. He was a sponge for information, and he was only too happy to listen to us when we were talking. So it was really fun for us to have his friendship. And as it grew, and he got to the point where he traveled with us on the circus, it just became more enjoyable, you know, seeing Henry struggle to park a camper van. On the one side, it's kind of pathetic, and you say, oh my gosh, he shouldn't be doing this. But on the other side, we had to laugh and say, who else would have been able to pull that off? And generally what I do, I'd rescue him. I'd say, okay, Henry, just get out the camper van and I'll park it for you, because it means you have to actually reverse instead of going forwards all the time. And so I'd get in and help him reverse. And then it wouldn't always stop there. Then I'd have to connect the electricity to his the power to his camper van, or electric and water. We put a hose in, so he had running water in that. And you know, people think that in the circus community we're living in caravans, we're living rough, but we didn't. We had very nice travel trailers for people in America, but we had I had an American caravan which was very, very well fitted out, and most of them are like a small home and as luxurious. And so Henry's camper van was no different, and he didn't need more. He just wanted a place to be close to us, and a place where he can have some silent time and do his prayers and reflections, and a place that he could go and rest if needs be. But it wasn't beyond Henry to come and sit in one of our caravans and fall asleep on the couch after lunch or something like that. So generally, we accommodated him in as much of what he wanted to do as possible. And our friendship grew, and it never stopped growing until our last conversation with him, which was in July of 1996. And so it was a big shock to us when we heard about his death, and we were very sad to know that we had lost a dear friend to us. And I'm pretty sure the rest of the community that knew Henry had the same reaction.
Mm. 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 So we can also see, you can show us what Henry saw the first time that he saw you perform.
Okay, so
totally, this really fascinates me. So everybody, imagine for a moment you're Henry. You have just you've just finished writing a book about the prodigal son that you've been working on for 10 years, about a painting. You're writing a book called Life, that will be called Life of the Beloved. So that's the place you are in your life. And you go to the circus, as Rodleigh said, with your father, and you're expecting to see a nice, you know, a nice show. And instead you see something that just absolutely rivets you. And this is actually, Rodleigh, this is pretty close to the show you saw, right?
Correct, yeah. So quick introduction.
Yeah.
That I'm going to show you now is, and I'm pretty sure that everyone can see my screen. This is the team that that Henry met in Freiburg in the April of 1991. So this is pretty much how we were when he first met us. Going through, I keep doing that and I apologize. Going through the pictures, that's myself much long ago. Let me see there. And I'm going to do this too. I don't know, it was working a little better before.
It's working better before.
Why isn't it opening? All right, what I'm going to do is go straight to the video of the Flying Act. So when
is there a water bottle here? There's water up here.
Now this is a great quality copy of the Flying Trapeze Act, but all I've got of us at that time, when I transferred all of my video VHS imaging onto USB, some of the videotapes were quite old by then, and so it lost some of its quality. So this is the Flying Trapeze Act, the way Henry saw it. I'm just going back to the beginning. And at Carolyn's request, I've included the opening announcement, which talked a little bit about our Flying Trapeze Act. And I'll just do a little translation for the owner of the circus talking about our act. And this is what Henri would have heard when he was sitting in the tent, in the circus tent, watching our show. He said, the preparations for the Flying Trapeze team has just been finished, and we apologize to the people in the front rows for any inconvenience, but we need to keep safety for our performers, and I'm sure you understand. He said, interesting thing about this Flying Trapeze team is that they work in 3 different levels. He said, not only does this allow a fluid run of their act, but it increases the dangerous and difficult combinations that they can perform. He says, right on the top is a catcher that does hand casting cradle. In the middle is the traditional flying trapeze circus, flying trapeze, and at the bottom is the Russian swing, which allows long jumps through the air or through the air in the big top tent. Okay, so his announcement was Daredevil Artistry from South Africa and America, the Flying Rodleighs. And so that was our entrance music, and entering in from the right-hand side in our silver capes are Carleen and Jenny and Jonathan, the cradle catcher, Joe, the swinging trapeze catcher, and myself as the lead flyer. Okay, the climbing up onto the equipment is all part of the anticipation, generating more interest and anticipation. And as you can see, standing right up on the top of the rigging at the cupola lights is Jonathan, and we are at 12 meters high there, where he is standing at the lights. And so unlike traditional flying trapeze teams, we have the Russian swing and have used it in combination with the 2 different catches.
Rodleigh, shall I just take to do an overdub while it runs and just read what Henri said about it?
Go ahead.
About his first experience? Okay. So you can keep running. Okay, can everyone hear me okay? Actually,
Yes,
I can't see
go
you.
ahead and continue.
Okay. So when Henri saw the Flying Rodleighs, he spent that week with them, and he dictated a tape immediately afterwards about his experience. And he just babbles with excitement. And he said, what really got me, what really fascinated me was the trapeze artists. And that's why I became so involved in the circus. And when I saw them at the very beginning, it was absolutely fascinating. This was a group of 5 trapeze artists, 4 of them people from South Africa, 1 an American. I was just so impressed by this group that I kept thinking about them. They did incredible things in the air. And somehow, and that was important, that I realized that has always been why I went to the circus. It was never for the animals and never really for the clowns. But what I was always waiting for, and what really grabbed me, was the trapeze artists. And these guys were really amazing. Actually, they weren't all guys. There were 3 men and 2 women. And I was just fascinated by the way they were moving freely in the air and making these incredible jumps and catching each other. And I was just fascinated by their physical prowess. But I was as much fascinated by the group as a team. the way they worked together, because I realized there must be enormous intimacy among these people when everything is so dependent on cooperation, when everything is so dependent on mutual trust and everything is dependent on exact timing. I realized from the very beginning that this group has to be really well together. And I saw that they enjoyed it. They really had fun doing it. And there was a kind of excitement in them that became very contagious for me. It was a kind of wow, you know. And I must confess that when I saw them, they seemed to be in a way like gods, so far that I wouldn't even dare come close to them. I had this emotional response that these people are really so far above me in their talent or in their giftedness. They are such great artists. And who am I, a tiny little guy wanting to get to know them? So I went to the show and I saw it again, and I began, you know, watching all the other acts. But as soon as those Flying Rodleighs came on, I got all excited again. The whole way they walked right in there and they climbed to the top of the tent and made these enormous jumps, and the music and their whole style, and they're smiling at each other and the fun they had and their timing and the whole thing. I couldn't even believe they were doing it. So Rodleigh, none of us are ever going to do this. Do you want to just say some more about what we're seeing, about what it feels like to be a flyer?
Sure. So that's me doing the main trick in the act, with the most trick with the most difficulty. At the time, going across to Joe. And yes, you talked a little bit about Henry's observation, is how much we had to trust each other. And it wasn't just a matter of saying, yeah, we trust you because you're not going to tell a secret. We basically trust you because you're not going to drop us. We're going to trust that the decision you make to catch us is a good decision, and that we are safe in your hands when we are caught. And that's really the thing that captured Henry about us. And in particular, this flight that I'm about to make off the Russian swing now is one that captures everybody, because you're in the air for so long, and sooner or later, someone's got to catch you, because you're just hanging there, presenting your hands and just waiting until you're caught. And in my case, Joe caught me safely. And we spoke a little bit about that moment of catch. And it is a relief at one stage, but it's also an expectation at another, is that we expect to be caught. And when we're caught, it's still a relief to be caught. So we know that we are in those safe hands. We have not missed. We do not fall to the net. We do not fail. We have succeeded yet again. And that's part of that adrenaline that goes through us every time we perform. Our final sequence in our routine is the passing leap, where one flyer goes over the second flyer in midair as we transfer between the catcher and the trapeze bar. And in this case, it's Jenny going underneath. I'm going over the top. And as you can see, it's hard work for the catcher. And back safely to the platform. And the deserved applause from the audience, because that is a difficult and dangerous sequence as well. And so we usually finished the flying act with that particular skill. And then coming down as a dismount, since nobody's actually entered the net, we use the net as part of that, because it's a nice, for the audience to see us falling into the net. And obviously we set it up for a reason. And so we use it in our dismounts. And that was Joe, our catcher, our trusted catcher, coming down first. My sister Carolyn coming down next, just doing nice skills to the net, making it look really easy, of course. But each individual skill takes months and months and sometimes years of training to perfect. And then Jenny coming down as well. Now, all of us had different jobs before we started to work together in our flying trapeze team. And this is what Henry found really interesting about us, is that how did you all get together considering your past lives? And Jonathan doing the big dive off the top, which the audience really loved. And we'll talk about that later on, as far as what our different jobs were before we got here. And this was my idea, to make this flying trapeze team and present it the way it is being presented to you now. Audience love that rebound. It's an unexpected rebound back up to the catch bar. And we always got a delightful applause from the German audiences who seem to appreciate our work more so than in other countries that we performed in. So it was really nice for us to spend 8 years performing on Circus Barroom. And that's basically the end of our act. And that's what Henri would do. So I'm going to stop sharing with you for a second and get back to this. And so, yeah, that was the act that Henri would have seen at the time when he needed to see it. And he had seen so many parallels with his life, and which was very interesting for us, because it was only after we'd met him and actually got to know him better that we started to understand what those parallels were and meant to him, and how he managed to use it in his writings and in his sermons and in his day-to-day living following his meeting with us.
One of the things Henri also wrote after that, when he babbled that first, very spontaneous tape, but then he went back in and he tried to write about that week more in a more literary style. And one of the things he wrote, the 10 minutes that followed, the 10 minutes of your act, somehow gave me a glimpse of a world that had eluded me so far, a world of discipline and freedom, diversity and harmony, risk and safety, individuality and community, and most of all, flying and catching. I sat transfixed in my chair and couldn't believe what I saw.
Yes, Henri had a great way with words, explaining everything that we failed to connect. He made a connection between us that gave me a totally new aspect of our performance and what it may mean to a member sitting in the audience. Initially, it was just to excite and thrill an audience and see that we're doing these dangerous skills flawlessly, that we've trained hard enough, that we've disciplined ourselves enough to be able to achieve these difficult and dangerous skills for their entertainment. And so that's the primary objective. But then Henri came up with all of these secondary, which were not our objectives, but realities. This is realities that we had made a community in our team. We had become friends, we had become dependents on each other. And so our trust within each other, because of our trust to the catchers for catching us and keeping us safe, and our trust to each other, within each other, to know that the trapeze bar will arrive at the right time for us to take it and return to the platform. It doesn't just happen through hours and hours of training, but it happens through years and years of living together and trusting each other and being there for each other. And I think this is what Henri found out about us without us actually putting the words to it. We knew that that happens, but we just didn't actually make those connections on a different, I suppose, social level. And then we made a community within the circus team. In other words, all the other cast members that performed in that ring with us, that our audiences would watch, we were part of that big team. And then we were part of the traveling circus community, which was our little circus town, for that matter. A town on wheels is that there were 80 or 90 people involved with the way the circus traveled, all the workers to put up the tent and take it down, and all the people looking after the animals, and all the people in charge of advertising for us and the management of the circus. And we were just a small cog in that big wheel. But we were the star attraction of the show. We had a different responsibility to the other acts because we were the ones that were most commonly advertised and interviewed by local radio and newspaper stations to present something why they should, or why the audience should visit Circus Bar in that town. And so we did feel a responsibility. And so I had great ambitions. I wanted to be the best flying trapeze act in Europe, at least. And I wanted to work very hard. So we trained very regularly over and above our very difficult show schedule. We were doing 2 performances every day. And for 3 days a week, we also did 1 or 2 hours of training 3 times a week. And so I was working on unusual skills. I mean, my imagination was great when it came to say, let's see what we can do now, or let's try this sequence, or let's try that sequence. And Henri was there watching us quite often failing. In fact, training is 99% failure. You know, that 1% of success that you see for 10 minutes in the act is literally our finest work and our most consistent work. And we're presenting that to an audience, but the audience, thankfully, don't see the hours and hours of failure that happens. And Henri captured that as well. He said, you can fail and forgive each other for the failure. And that is really, really hard when you, especially in a situation where you have a job on the line and the failure of your catching and of the success of your act, you won't get another contract. And so you end up trying to be as perfect as possible, which puts you under, or the performer under, a lot more pressure. And being able to perform fluidly and artistically as an entertainer adds to the pressure. And what Henri was seeing was that you do have that pressure. You have that pressure of being perfect. You have that pressure of entertaining the audience. You have that pressure that you've created within yourself to be better. And we never really thought about it in those words. It was just ambition for us. For us, it was ambition. For Henri, it was a very different sort of soul-searching experience that he said, in order for you to be able to do that, these are the things that I believe you're going through. And no surprises that Henri was a fantastic psychologist, because he saw through those things in a way that I'd never considered it. And after talking about these things with Henri, I suddenly started to feel that I had a totally different responsibility to my team and to my audience in what we are presenting to them. How do I feel about that? And Henri talks about us being able to focus on just the act for those 10 minutes. And he compared it to his own devotion and saying, during my prayer time, I want to be able to focus just 100% and be within that prayer and be within and with God at that same time, without allowing any of my outside daily problems to enter. And we admitted, we said, that's almost impossible. Yes, we are concentrating a lot, but it's very easy for us to fail. It's very easy for us to see something in the audience that distracts us just long enough to take our mind off our work, and then we have a mistake. And like I said before, it does not take a big mistake to have an obvious failure or to have an obvious result. So one of the things that Henri was interested about was Carlene's daughter, Kylie. She was only 3 or 4 at the time. And we always made sure that she sat at us in a certain place in the big top tent, right in the top tiers, right at the back, so that Carlene could see her during the act and know that she was safe. And one day she looked down into the audience casually just to see that her daughter was there, and she wasn't. And she started panicking, saying, oh my gosh, where is the girl? Because she's not sitting in the chairs where she's supposed to sit. And she had to then stop thinking about her daughter in order to do the next sequence, because the next sequence required all of her concentration. But I think at the back of her mind, she's sitting there knowing and worrying, saying, if Kylie happens to run out of the tent at the wrong time while the horses or the zebra are running from the tent or to their enclosures or vice versa, they are so crazy, a little girl like that will be run over and very possibly hurt or injured badly. So those were the things that we had to avoid thinking about. And another time that Henri mentioned to us he asked us about, he said, you know, my mum died when in 92, in October of 92, and I got a phone call from my older sister, basically at the beginning of the show. You know, showtime was about to start, and she said, "Oh, I just got to tell you this bad news. You know, your mum's died." So how do you take that into the show with you? How do you take that into the tent and not think about that? So my sister and I mean, obviously I told my sister, and we both thought that the only way we could actually do our job and not allow ourselves, sorry, to be influenced by that news or by that sad news was to imagine that we were actually performing for my mum and that she was sitting in the audience pretty much next to where Kylie would sit. And so she'd be watching over Kylie and watching over us as well. And we could do the performance in her honor and make sure that we could continue concentrating on our job so that we didn't get hurt and that we put on a flawless performance, because the other members in the audience don't know that your mom just died. The other members in the audience don't know that your daughter's not sitting in the same chair where she should sit. And the other members of the audience don't know that you might be suffering from a cold, or that your wrist is really hurting, or that your knees are really sore, and so forth and so on. There's so many things that are hidden from the audience, but they're hidden from the audience on purpose, because we're not doing a show up there to get their sympathy. We're doing a show up there so that they can forget their worries, that they can forget about their own personal problems and distract them for a little bit, because isn't that what entertainment is? It's a distraction from your daily lives and making you feel that somebody else is the person that actually is taking on that job for you. And so yes, being able to focus that hard is a hard job, and being able to perform under those conditions is a hard job. And for us, it was just a job. But for Henri, it was an amazing task. And I think that this is the thing that made him so special for us, is that he actually showed us that we had a much harder job than we thought we did. And we were so pleased that that we had him in our lives, because we knew somebody actually understands. Somebody knows what it's like. Somebody has reflected on this and actually gone into our lives and said, no wonder a performer's life has got a short longevity. It's because look at the amount of pressure that you put yourself under just to earn a living. And for us, it wasn't earning a living. For me, it was living a dream. You know, I'm fifth generation of circus in my family. And ever since I was a child, I knew I wanted to be a circus performer, even though my parents were no longer in the circus, and I never traveled with them on the show. And that was just my job. That was my calling. That was my destiny, was to be living that dream. And the problems I had was afterwards, when my dream ended. And now and my mum often said to me, Rodleigh, I don't want you to be a circus performer because of the amount of pain it's going to cause you in the future. And I recall her being like not being able to sleep on one shoulder or one side because her shoulder was constantly in pain. I used to stand there and watch every now and then a blood vessel in her leg would burst and just blood would run out of her leg. And I'm saying, I would be fearful for her, saying, Mom, what's going on with you? And she said, oh, that's just a kick from the camel in 1952 or something like that. So it was just one of those things that become a reality to circus performers, is that you will pay for it. As I'm paying for it now. I'm heading for a double knee replacement, and saying, well, I guess my mom was right. But it wasn't enough to deter me. I was still determined to be that circus performer. I was still determined to be that person that the audience applauds for. And I was always going to be that leader of the team that made a big difference to somebody. And in my case, I think that somebody was Henri Nouwen.
Wow. I could see why he was so mesmerized by all the layers of what was happening. Yeah. So there's this moment when you invited him to become a circus performer himself. And just before we get to that, I should also say that we'll have in a few minutes, we can go to some chat. If anyone has questions, you can put them in the chat. Or since there's not that many of us, we could unmute you and you could ask them yourselves. So think about whether you've got questions. We've got time for questions and answers at the end. But before that,
I'm going to share my screen again.
Yeah.
And I would like to share with you Henri actually doing flying trapeze.
Yeah.
I want to see that.
Okay, so I'll give the commentary here. I've got Henri standing with a safety belt around his waist, attached to 2 safety lines, which is being held on the ground by my catcher, Joe. I'm standing behind Henri and Carolyn standing on the other side, holding the bar so that he can get a good grip on the bar. And now I'm helping him get his legs off the platform, and I'll just drop him and he's off swinging. And unfortunately, we can't get a nice, good close-up of his face, but I guarantee you he had the biggest smile on his face the whole time while he was swinging. And he's trying to kick his legs around. Remember, he's in his 60s here, never done much exercise in his life. You have to be very strong to do flying trapeze. And he's hanging on his arms, and we call him down to drop into the net, and he did that quite well. But then the fun began. He gets applause from the other people that were sitting in the tent, happened to be watching him at the time. He gets up, and then he realizes that walking in the net is quite an art. And I'll let you enjoy watching Henri at his best, being the clown that he wishes he was, trying to be attentive, but he's just in a new place. This is the Henri Nouwen that I wish people at his funeral were able to see and to celebrate, because this is the Henri we knew, and he was so much fun. You can hear the people that were sitting in the tent watching him. They were enjoying it with him. They could see he was like a little kid again, playing on there, and we just drop him down to the sitting position. So that was really amazing. And there were other footages that I got of him hanging under the catcher, which unfortunately the tapes were too badly damaged to reproduce for you to enjoy now. But that's basically Henri
Oh, wow.
swinging on the flying trapeze, and he did it more than once, by the way. He did enjoy it, and he knew. I mean, he said his hands were sore and his arms were sore after just doing it once, but that was one of those things that he needed to try, and he felt that when he was hanging in the hands of the catcher, how safe he felt and how strong it felt. And I said to him, come on, kick your legs around, try to fall down. And he did, and he couldn't fall down. I mean, obviously he still had the safety lines attached to his safety belt, and the catcher was holding him. But I think it was really important for us and for him to have gone through that experience, because only then could he write about feeling safe in the hands of the catcher. And he wrote about that in quite a few times. He wrote about that analogy, saying, being caught by the catcher made him feel safe, made him feel that there was something else to go to, made him feel that he could take the risks in life and just present his hands to the catcher, knowing that he would be caught. And that followed one of the conversations that we had about the catcher. And he said to me, how do you, how do you trust your catcher? And I said, Henry, when you fly to a catcher, sometimes the audience see what the flyer does, which is all these big, great twists and turns and these difficult skills, which obviously take a lot of skill. And there's a lot of danger in that. And obviously you're going to get hurt learning those skills. But at the end of the day, the catcher is the most important person in the act, because without him there, anything that I do would be superfluous. It would not be important at all. But with the catcher there, it gives me something to go towards, something to yearn for, something to expect. I expect to be caught. But the only way I can get caught is to put my hands out and allow the catcher to catch me. So, and I said, it's really dangerous if I try to catch the catcher, because as I'm flying through the air, I'd be moving my hands in order to try to reach him. And right at the moment when he's trying to catch me, I could move my hand away from him and he'd miss me and we'd miss the catch, or we'd collide and we could hurt each other. So the trust that you have is just to present your hands to the catcher as a flyer, give him something really still and stable to focus on. And once he's got you, you can grab onto him in that catch position. He'll grab you, you grab him. And in that way, you can swing safely together. And before he lets you go at the top of the swing on the other side. So Henry really liked that analogy, being caught. And we did a lot of pictures for Henry. Supposedly for this book, he had a gentleman called Ron van den Bosch, who came over from Holland, and they visited us in Dortmund in June of 1992, or 93, I should say. And they spent about a week with us doing lots and lots of pictures, of which I have some that I can share with you today.
Actually, Rodleigh, I'm thinking we might run out of time, and I want people to be able to ask questions. So I'm thinking that maybe we'll skip the photos and go straight to, what do you think? And go straight to questions and invite. So Monica is open to moderating questions and offering them. I do want to say though, and you, maybe the picture you should pull up is, there's a fantastic picture of Henry's very good friend, Frank Hamilton, trying out the trapeze. And Frank is in this picture. He's on, sorry, it's all backwards to me. That's Frank. He was very excited about this book. And I just heard from his friend, Michael Harank this week that Frank died at the end of January. So I wanted to just say that Frank was a good friend of Henry's, a very close friend. He came with Henry to the Flying Rodleighs circus. He read what Henry wrote about trying to drive his own caravan and got so worried he offered to come with Henry and drive if he needed a driver. And he too tried the flying trapeze. And there's just so I wanted to just name that Frank loved this book, that he was really supportive of it, that he was very, very kind and generous. And I'm sorry he didn't get to see it in print, but I honor his friendship with Henry.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for mentioning Frank. And yes, if you're interested in seeing a picture of Frank on the trapeze, I do have one of those. And as you would have seen in the cover, in the back cover of the book, the picture of Frank standing awkwardly holding Henry with us as Henry lies there blissfully in his happy place.
Good. So maybe people could think about their questions, throw them in the chat. And Monica will moderate it. And while you think of your questions and put them in the chat, Rodleigh, if you can find the picture of Frank, it'd be pretty fun to see.
I'll bring it up in the meantime, okay?
Yeah, okay.
I think if everyone who has a question just writes it in the chat, then I can just monitor it so that these folks can focus on answering them.
Great. Thank you, Monica.
Maybe while Rodleigh's getting that, I'll just get started with the first question. This one's for the author. I I think Henry's other books and works are really spiritual explorations. That's what he's most famous for. And he obviously felt something very profound and with his experiences with the circus. And I'm just wondering, for you, are there spiritual reflections in Henry's work in this book that you feel are kind of unique or different from his other works? And how do you hope readers who have been spiritually impacted by Henry's body of work will connect to this new book?
That's such a good question, because this book is really different. It's a story. It is really telling a narrative of the story of Henry and the Flying Rodleighs. And as you maybe you heard a hint of, it's framed by a story of Henry's rescue during a heart attack out a window. So there are layers and layers of the story. And as he's taken out the window, he thinks back over his life, and he tries to think of the reasons himself as to why he was so attracted to the Flying Rodleighs and the moments in his life that brought him to the moment he was in. And so part of that is working with his own writing, and part of that is my trying to guess how it came together given what I see in his life. And what's important about this book is it doesn't give lessons. Like, it doesn't, unlike his other books, it doesn't give, a specific articulated spiritual lesson for you. It tells a story. And Henry really wanted to discipline himself in a way to write that way, to try to write in a way that readers would pull their own morals, their own decisions, their own thinking out of it. He wanted to write something that from the kind of moist soil of the earth would sprout up something new for every reader, which is really different. And he actually wrote outlines for a book that was more conventional, a very conventional Henry book, from career to vocation, from 3 movements from X to Y. And then he just didn't write that book because he didn't want to. He wanted to write a story. So partly in answer to that question, I think Henry wanted to write something that readers would find their own story in that story, their own lessons, their own insights. Good question. Rodleigh, do you have your photo?
Yeah. So I'm just going to share my screen again and share those pictures of Frank with you, since we spoke about it. And I've got them ready to show you. Okay, that's Frank and Henry sitting at a lunch table after one of our photo shoots in Dortmund in June of 1993. And then here's another picture of Frank up on the trapeze. It was very hot. It was the middle of summer there in the June of 93. But as you can see, Frank's face filled with terror. But unlike Henry, when he swung on the trapeze, he didn't seem to show any of that fear that you normally have when falling through the air and being that high. The platform where our feet are is 7 meters above the ground, which is over 23 feet. And so you'd say, wow, I'd say that somebody should be afraid up there if you haven't trained for it. So Frank was showing the right kind of and
Rodleigh, show you guys are just standing on the platform laughing. Look at you.
Yeah. So yeah, that's as Lucan was saying. He was so scared to drop off there, but we were just making sure that he was safe, and the rest was up to gravity to do the job. So yeah, that was Frank on the trapeze. Now okay. I'll stop sharing because there was an interesting question that I'd like to answer from Jordan.
Yeah, there's one here that says, so there's a few questions, but I'll just start with this first one. So this says, so much of this book and story is about the completely unexpected happening. In that theme, can one, or I suggest both of you, share something unexpected or surprising about Henry in your experience?
Well, I suppose
Rodleigh start.
Yes, certainly.
And Monica, I'm just going to bring you into the spotlight, so you've got a face too. There you go.
Oh, okay. I suppose the most interesting or unexpected thing about Henry was certainly the fact that he chose to hire and rent a camper van and to come on tour with us for 4 weeks during the summer tour. And they were difficult 4 weeks because during the height of summer, the circus moves regularly or often. And he wasn't great at driving, let alone driving a camper van let alone driving late at night, because that is when we drove. We drove from one town to the next late at night to avoid all the traffic that we would normally get during the daytime. And so he didn't change gears very well in his camper van, and he'd be stuck in third gear for the whole trip, thinking that he was changing to another gear, but he'd end up staying in third gear. And overheating his the motor. So there were a few times that that we got lost, and that was quite funny, because I'd be at the front of our convoy with a two-way radio between myself, and Jonathan would be at the back of the convoy with everybody else in between. So that we had about 5 or 6 trucks and caravans that everybody lived in, and that carried all of our equipment. And that was just for the Flying Trapeze Act, not even the whole circus. That was just our Flying Trapeze Act. And we drive along, and we try to be conservative to make sure everybody was behind us. But sooner or later, you're going to reach a traffic light that you have to stop at, or half the convoy stops, and then I drive along and there's no convenient place to stop and wait for the others. And so we kind of get separated. And then sooner or later, someone's going to take the wrong turn, and we spend another half hour just trying to regroup and find each other. And one time, Henry realized that he had forgotten his step sticking out of the camper van, and he was so terrified that he was going to rip the step off that he ended up having to stop. And so Jonathan, he called in and said, "Hey, Henry's had to stop. There might be a problem." So we thought, oh, once again, he's left the gear in third gear again. So I walked all the way down. We stopped, walked all the way down, came to him, and I found him ready to go with a big smile on his face. I said, what happened? He said, "Oh, the step was out and I wanted to put it back in again." So I thought, well, he's definitely toughened up to circus living. He could actually have the awareness to stop, fix up the problem and keep going, and seemed pretty pleased about it. But, Henry had 2 smiles. The one smile was, "I'm enjoying life and I'm really enjoying what's happening right now." And the other one was, "I'm putting on a smile because I'm terrified and I don't want everybody to know how bad it is." And he had that smile on when he was driving the camper van. And usually when I saw him with that smile on his face, I take over and say, "Okay, Henry, I'll do the rest from here. Go get a cup of tea with Carleen or someone, and I'll do the rest for you tonight." So that was definitely unexpected. However, I already mentioned one other thing about something unexpected happening, and that was our reaction to ourselves, thanks to Henry. For the longest time when Henry was with us, he never really spoke about what he was writing about. And it seemed like it was not important to him. He didn't put his books onto us and say, "Here, read my book." He was just an author, a religious author, but he was just an author. And then he basically sent me a book one day, The Beloved. And on page 66 in that, he talks about catching the catcher, the hands of the catcher catching. And I said, that was the first time that I'd actually seen words that we had spoken about in print. And that was unexpected, that he could find those things that I've already mentioned tonight about our lives that I didn't expect to think about. It was just, for me, I was an entertainer, I was an acrobat, and Henry had found that I was a lot more than that. I wasn't just an entertainer and an acrobat. I was somebody that was carrying a lot of pressure and being the leader of a team and being part and a member of a community. So that was really nice, and I thank Henry for that. Okay, Monica, next question.
Oh, you're muted.
I think let's just pivot over and when we can answer that same question, something unexpected.
Oh, sorry, say it again.
The question was, so much of this book and story is about the completely unexpected. In that theme, can you share something unexpected or surprising about Henry from your own experience?
Actually, one of the really funny pieces in the book is chapter 8, I think, which actually predates meeting the circus. but I found it in an unpublished journal, and he is sitting watching TV with his father, and he's channel flipping between a Tina Turner concert in front of a live audience with David Bowie, and which is, overtly sexual and wildly physical. And he's channel flipping between that and Bach's Saint Matthew Passion. And he just is loving these two concerts. And he's sitting there with his dad, channel flipping back and forth, loving both this very spiritual and this very embodied, energetic thing. And he loves them both. And there was something about that he wanted to write it down in full detail, that it caught something unexpected about Henri for me, or that I forget, is how absolutely straightforward he is about what he's experiencing and how much he wants to share it, and how much fun and fascinating it is. Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a few more in here. There's first to Rodleigh. Has the troupe stayed close once you retired, and would you say that the energy of love sustained your work together?
Yes and no. I'll start off by saying no first, because during the time that Henri was friends with us, our swinging trapeze catcher Jonas, he left our team. He was having a hard time on that circus, in that he never had a partner. And so he was pretty lonely when we weren't performing and training. And even though as a group or as a team, we also needed to give each other space when we weren't performing. And so he did feel a little bit alone, and he wanted to leave and go to another circus. Now, he used to have a girlfriend on the show with us. He had an estranged wife back in South Africa with 2 children, but they never really came to visit on the show. And so he just wanted to spread his wings and go somewhere else. And we were really sad to see him go, because he'd been a friend of mine for many, many years. And we worked together in the United States, and he basically caught for me for about 8 or 9 years as a professional catcher. So that was really good. And then we got a new catcher, John, and John arrived just before we went to Holland in the Christmas time, or the December of 1994, when Bart Gavigan and his production team, or his filming team, came over and shot the documentary called Angels Over the Net. And Henri noticed in that production how hard it was for us to get to know a new catcher. Remember, it's a new member of the team, a new position that he's, or a new person in a position that is a very important position in our job as the catcher. And he didn't feel the same way that Joe felt when we caught, and he was out of shape and he wasn't as experienced as Joe. So we were having to adapt to John. His name was also John, by the way, John Vokes. And sadly, now that I mention him, John died. He passed away due to throat cancer. He got cancer in the throat, and so he died quite a few years ago. But in his honor anyway, he performed with us for the last 3 years of our, or maybe 4 years of our performing life. And he was he fitted into the team really, really well. And Henri did get to know John. The team did stay quite closely connected, other than Joe, but we did get 2 new members in the team. When Jenny, she had a lot of, I suppose, rheumatoid arthritis pains in her joints. She stopped performing for a while, and I had a Russian acrobat called Vyacheslav Skokin, or Slava for short, join our team. And then another young lady joined the team. Her name was Kerry Solomon, and she was a South African that I had trained back in South Africa many years ago, and she was now old enough to join the team. And so Henri was there while we introduced those 2 new members into our community, or into our team. And so that was nice. And as usual, Henri was always very, very welcoming them as well into his life. when we actually stopped working on Circus Ballroom at the end of '98, we had to stop due to my injuries, and we had a couple of contracts offered to us in Europe by some other really good circuses. But we just needed a break. We've been working really hard. We were doing something like 600 performances a year, which was really, really hard on our bodies. Plus putting up all of our equipment daily, knocking in pegs by hand and that. So there's, we got more injured setting up our gear than we did performing and actually doing our show. And that was a hard toll on our bodies. My catcher, Jonathan, I broke his knee during a performance one night when he was catching me. And that was just wear and tear. And my sister, Carolyn, ended up tearing her tummy muscles quite badly. So she had to wear a corset just to help them repair. And we couldn't find people who we could replace those people easily. And so it just became really, really hard for us to keep the team going. But for the people that we could, Jenny and myself, Carlin and Jonathan and Joe, to a certain extent, we kept, and I've already spoken a little bit about Joe earlier today with Caroline saying that he is suffering some bad health with emphysema and respiratory problems. So he's still alive,
kept in
living
touch
in
with each
Cape Town.
other. You were saying that you kept in touch with each other, and
yes.
And you also said that everyone's really pleased that the book is finally coming out.
Yes,
And
definitely. So
yeah.
It's kind of forcing them to go back to a happier time. And that certainly is the case with me as well, is that we have many, many great memories of not only performing, but of our time with Henri. And so this book has certainly helped jog our memories and take us a trip down, I suppose, memory lane in a way. But still, I think it's so nice that we can finally share the story with the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Another question, this one, I'll just make it into a two-parter, but to Rodleigh, it says, what did you and your troupe make of Henri's choice of a life dedicated to God and to faith? Were you a man of faith when you met him, and did his concerns affect your spiritual life? And Mom, maybe after that, you can just reflect a little bit on Henri's implications on your own spiritual journey. So I'll start with Rodleigh.
Yes, it was a surprise for us to when Henri introduced himself as the Catholic priest, because he said, "I'm an author, and I'm a Catholic priest." And I thought to myself, why is this Catholic priest finding our Flying Trapeze Act so interesting? And the answer wasn't clear in the beginning. It was only really after many years and strangely enough, after his death, that we actually began to understand and why it became clearer to us. But at the time, it was very accepting for us. I grew up in as a Christian in the Seventh-day Adventist faith. My mom desperately wanted me to be a minister, actually, and sent me to a school that was run by the Seventh-day Adventist religion in South Africa, called Helderberg College. And I went there, finished my high school years there. And so I know a lot about religion. And I was, in fact, even baptized as a young adult in that religion many years ago. But it became too difficult to perform in the circus and still be a member of that religion, because they were so staunch in their beliefs. And it became really hard for us to feel like we could manage both lifestyles. I either had to be a Seventh-day Adventist and just do a regular job, or be a circus performer and forget about going to church on a Saturday, because guess what happened on a Saturday is that we did 2 or 3 performances. And for them, any work on the Sabbath is not allowed. And so I felt very guilty about being a circus performer. And it was just a lot easier to turn my back on that religion in order to do what I wanted to do. And so as far as Henri was concerned, I would have been actually quite open to him talking about religion to us. had it come up. And the only time it ever came up actually was when my sister Ray Dawn died. Now, I haven't mentioned Ray Dawn, but she was an older sister by about 14 years to me. And she was the reason why I finally got into the circus community, because she opened or gave me the doorway, you could say, to circus. She performed in a flying trapeze troupe. And when I was 10 years old, I was able to have a swing on that trapeze. And after just that experience, I knew I wanted to be a flying trapeze performer, and that was it. That was my goal for the rest of my life until I actually did that. And Ray Dawn died when she was 52 years old. She lived in Italy at the time. And I was the only close member of the family that could go to her funeral. And indeed was probably the first funeral I ever attended. So it was a very big shock to me emotionally to have to go through that experience. Not only that, in a country where the language I couldn't speak completely well. I can speak some Italian, but when you have that whole new set of vocabulary to do with churches and funerals and caskets and this, that, and the other, it was very overwhelming for me. And I had to go there alone because the rest of my team was preparing to performing in Holland actually at the same time. So I made a trip down from Holland all the way down to Italy, to Rimini, where she lived, and returned back straight after the funeral. We met Henri soon after that. Henri came to visit us over that Christmas. He'd been to visit his father. And when he heard that we were performing in Holland, it was much closer for him to go there. And so he came over with one of his minister friends and came and watched the show, and we caught up and we spoke a little bit about my sister's death. And that was the first time that he gave me some insight into that loss and my reaction to it and how I felt about it. And I think having opened that door started to probably allow Henri to be the person that he was to other people, to be that person who consoled you, the person who gave you the feeling that everything would still be okay and that you've done nothing wrong because it's your life. And I think, but in a way, it was kind of nice that Henri didn't have to do that, because we wanted to still be that oasis for Henri, that Henri could come to and just be who he wanted to be and not carry with him the burdens of being the person responsible for our emotional and spiritual needs.
I'm kind of watching our participant numbers drop and thinking that maybe we should wind up our party. I don't know.
Do you want to just finish the other part of that question, Mom, and just say a quick reflection on the ways that Henri implicated your spiritual journey?
Well, I've been immersed in Henri's journey around the Flying Rodleighs for almost 5 years now. One of the things he talks about is how the different communities that he gets connected to keep breaking down his sense of who's in or who's out, or what's right or what's wrong. And the phrase he uses is, he says, you know, the boundaries just keep dissolving in front of him. And he says, and you just start to feel your heart expanding and expanding. And he says, and there's no limits to that expansion. And it just seemed like Henri's spirituality and the spiritual journey I want for myself in a nutshell, you know, that your heart will just expand and expand, and there'll be no limits to that expansion. Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful place to end. That's all the questions from the chat. So I'll just let you make some final remarks.
Great. I just want to thank everyone who came. I'm just trying to see if I can go to gallery view and see everybody. It's fantastic to see you. I don't know if people want to put their videos on and wave at each other, but I can tell you some of the people here. There's one of Henri's oldest friends, Peter Nouse, I see. There's Bart Gavigan, who did the Angels Over the Net film and was a friend to Henri on so many profound levels. I don't even know where to start. One of his, and Michael Harank, who I introduced earlier. And oh man, it's just so exciting. So many good people here. Yeah. Thank you all. If we were together, we'd drink and dance and have a grand time, but thanks for coming.
And I might just add that once you've had a chance to read the book, it'll be really nice to get some kind of review of this. And we know that you're a Henry's friend, and we know that you give us an honest review. But I have to thank Caroline at this time for going over and beyond, above and beyond the expectation of presenting Henry's book in a way that I really think that he would have appreciated. Despite the fact that he had to be taken out of a window to do that. And I think as Frank would have mentioned, he would have given you a big hug and given you all of his approval for this. And so on behalf of our team and the people that knew Henry in a different way, we really thank you, Caroline, for bringing back all of these memories and helping us enjoy Henry once again.
Well, thank you all for coming. And
thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Good night.
Okay. And I'll sign off, and thank you all once again for your attendance. And Caroline, we'll speak again soon. Bart, it was really lovely.